Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday said that the post-COVID world will be about relearning, rethinking and reinventing, and our government is fully committed to this principle. That is to reform, transform and perform. Speaking at the IIT 2020 Global Summit on Friday, the Prime Minister said that there is no sector left out from India's reforms. The Prime Minister said that 2 years later, in 2022, India marks 75 years since independence and urged the Pan IIT movement to set an even higher benchmark for giving back to India. He urged the IIT alumni to share more of their ideas and inputs on how India can mark 75 years of its freedom. Noting that a large number of IIT alumni are in global leadership positions and their strong networks are spread across industry, academia, arts, governments, the Prime Minister urged that the Indian tech diaspora to debate, discuss and contribute to solutions in the emerging New World Tech Order. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the New World Tech Order and what India must do to achieve its goals. Joining me on the program today are S.R. Tayal, former ambassador, Praval Singh, Vice President, Marketing, Zoho Corp, and Professor M. Balakrishnan, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, IIT Delhi. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. Let's talk about, what kind of a world tech order is emerging, what's really happening as far as the tech space is concerned. This is a space that most countries are worried about and worried in particular about China and its emergence and dominance.
Yeah, when we were studying economics, there used to be 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And now there is another factor of production, that is data. And the way the world is changing, artificial intelligence is coming, there is a new term, globalization, global plus robotization, and it has huge impact. Whatever you listen to or read to or do projections in the future, that in future the machines, the artificial intelligence will not only process data, but they will also start interpreting it and also ask questions and answer those questions based on all this data. And in the Indian context, it is very important to fully understand where we are headed in this new technological age. And one worry, which I am sure Prime Minister Modi and all our policymakers would have, would be what would be the impact on employment. Because the entire technology, new technology development is being driven by 8 or 9 big companies. 6 of them are in America. Whereas in our times or earlier, most of the research used to come from some government-funded agencies. Like defense in US, internet came from the defense expenditure, etc. And the private sector driven new technology is totally focused only on profit, on greater return for the investor, and it is not human centric. Like a government technology will not be for driverless cars. It is a totally useless technology. So which way the technology is headed, it has huge implications, and it will have increase the divide between rich and poor countries. Within societies, it will have greater inequality between rich and poor. So there are huge implications, and some people even say that the march of technology needs to be stopped, but it cannot be stopped. But even big technology developers are saying some kind of regulation is required. So it's a very new world we are entering into, which will entirely change the life of human beings, the way they learn, they live, and what their own function, their own role is in the society, in economy, in creativity. And all these things are not perhaps being studied very well, in a very disjointed manner. Some people are working on it. But as policymakers, people have to, and countries have to think that where exactly this technology is headed, what will be its implications on human beings. And Prime Minister started saying this, and recently in G20 he said that all the development, new technology should be human centric, that individuals' interests should be protected. And I think that is something which is totally missing in whatever technology is being developed by these tech companies, whether they are based in United States or China. And here I see not much is really coming from Japan or West Europe, to my knowledge, the cutting edge of technology.
Right. Okay. Professor, since we are here, then let's also talk about and analyze what has changed in the last 1 year. And like the ambassador is suggesting that we are entering a new world completely as far as technology is concerned. So are we prepared to make that entry into this new world?
I think I would rather, of course, there is a broader question which Mr. Tayal has raised. So let me talk a little bit more about education, because that's something that is very important and also very relevant, because my own experience has been with 4 decades at IIT Delhi, and also he was addressing a Pan IIT summit. So education seems to be, it's at the center, because even to compete globally, we need to have very high quality education. So we also have a new education policy. And that policy also has to take technology to be a centerpiece of it. Education in technology has to be something which has to be a focus. I will talk about 3 points here. One of them related to diaspora and 2 related to the education that we are offering here. So one thing, Mr. Tayal also referred indirectly to the disparity in the society. So one thing that we are seeing at IIT Delhi is, over the last 15 to 20 years, the IITs also have become extremely heterogeneous in terms of the socioeconomic background of the students coming into the campus. This has been also because of the factor that a very large number of people who can afford higher education outside the country, they're also leaving the country, which means that a lot more students who don't have that economical wherewithal to really study abroad, they are actually now coming into the system. So when everybody was coming to the campus and we are providing a homogeneous living atmosphere, so there was no challenge. As soon as this pandemic stuck, and as soon as students have to go to their homes and study, and we had to do online, so it became a mess, because there is a very significant number of our students, IIT Delhi students and other IT students, who do not have access to connectivity, who do not have access to a laptop. They are trying to attend lectures on a mobile. And these have been a tremendous challenge. So whereas what I see around in NCR is the private institutions were very quickly able to adopt and complete their semesters, whereas all of us took a long time to come to terms with how do we actually offer online education. Though technology exists, all of us are very familiar with it, all of this, because we are used to conferences and so on. So this is one challenge, and this is a policy challenge, because though we subsidize students to a large extent, but we cannot we change quickly the policy to be able to give them laptops. So though we may actually be spending a lot more money when they are actually sitting in this. So clearly this age requires a very quick policy rethink. So that is one thing that I would like to say because of the heterogeneity. Second thing is, when we talk about increasing enrollment and so on, it should also proportionately increase enrollment in quality technical education. So that's very important. Otherwise, we will not be able to compete technically globally. So what it means is, a lot of today students, so this came in another context while I was interacting with a lot of government principals of Delhi and neighboring states. A lot of students do not take science or do not go for engineering. The students who are studying in government schools, primarily because they cannot afford full-time higher education. So we don't understand this phenomena, people who come from backgrounds like ours, because we can send our children to full-time higher education. Our own estimate is maybe 60% of our population actually cannot send their students to full-time higher education, even you offer them free education.
Right.
Today, there is an opportunity to go online and offer a lot of these courses online so that they can work, do internship, and along with it also study, and come to the campus for full time for a short period of time. Whatever cannot be offered online, they come. So the whole education paradigm has to be looked. so that people who cannot afford full-time higher education can also pursue technical education.
Right.
Third point I want to make is regarding the diaspora. So we have huge expertise, IIT alumni, NIT alumni, BITS alumni. All our top technical education institutions have huge alumni base working in top institutions, and which was Prime Minister was referring to. It's a huge possibility to connect with them to be able to offer high quality education here. So the model that is, of course, not at undergraduate level, but at research level, because we can aggregate students across campuses and start this national adjunct faculty professorship programs, where we invite these people who are now doing extremely well, because today it's become very easy to, of course, you have to compensate them, but the fact is person doesn't have to travel. Let's say that's 20 hours of teaching per year or 15 hours of teaching per year, but we can benefit in terms of research and technology across campuses. So if we can go into a scheme like this, that can really benefit, and the diaspora can play a very big role in this.
Okay, points taken. Let me take the discussion forward and bring in Prawal Singh as well into the picture. Prawal, how have Indian companies really evolved as far as technology is concerned, and how do we fare or how do we compare to our peers around the world?
Yeah, Frank, I think if you look at the last 10 years or so in the tech space, I would say what once used to be a hesitation that this product is made in India and might be inferior, that was the mindset, it's changing rapidly. We've seen that happen really rapidly within the country. Now, that technically means that we are shipping superior products. We are creating cutting edge technology and products. But one thing that I would like to say is, for it to happen at a faster pace and more broadly, a mindset change is required, which is happening, but there's still a lot of ground to cover. So what I mean to say that is, from a mindset of project management that historically, in the previous decade saw India becoming IT services, led country, from that to becoming a product-led country where there is a strong focus on R&D that should come in, and we're starting to see that happen, right? So I would say, oftentimes we say this is a question of lack of talent, right? But in our experience, that's not the case. What we've seen is that's a false perception. In fact, talent is there. We have to train them better. We have to inculcate the know-how to do certain things. And that's not limited to programming or coding or any of that, but broadly. I mean, something as trivial as mobile phones, right? I mean, the country has more than 1.5 billion connections. And broadly, we don't know how to make mobile phones in its full capacity, right? And we have to start somewhere, maybe with semiconductors, maybe with batteries. And we are doing that. We have started to do that. Similarly, the country as a whole is known for its medical expertise, right? But we still import all the medical equipments, right? I mean, think about it. What will it take to build an MRI machine in the country, right? I mean, you had to start somewhere. Maybe start with creating magnets and using them in toys and whatever. But my point is, we have to walk on that path to become what we truly want to become. And that mindset beyond project management, R&D-led mindset is what is important. And once that starts to happen, the core problem of what we call topsoil erosion, which is people moving from villages to cities and people from larger cities moving to different countries, essentially for what? It's basically high-value job opportunities. When they start to exist in India, we would see this reverse migration, all of that happening. And I think that's the larger point here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Taking the discussion forward now, I'm going to ask my panelists to be brief as well. We spent quite a bit of time on our opening remarks. So, Ambassador, the professor was speaking about the Indian diaspora. Let's not forget that the Indian diaspora has been extremely influential, and, we've seen them helm several top IT companies as well. So how can they contribute, and how interested will they be to contribute or to give back to India as well at this stage?
Two things. I think our information technology revolution, when it took place in the turn of the century or in the 90s, our people who had studied mostly in IITs and had settled in the Silicon Valley had played a very, very important role, a role of a bridge between the Indian skills and human resources and the requirement of American technology. And now, of course, we see that the American companies, at least the Silicon Valley, are heavily dominated or heavy presence of Indians. And I recall when I was Consul General in Houston and elsewhere, Thai was there, the Indus entrepreneurs, and they did a phenomenal job of mentoring, of guiding young entrepreneurs. Mostly they came from India and create creative thinking. They could bring in seed money. They could help the person to exploit his or her idea or his or her own science. And that is, I think, extremely important because unfortunately, I don't know whether Mr. Singh will agree, but in India, that ecosystem is still not there, where a youngster can come with an idea in a garage and he can find somebody to guide him, to mentor him, to give him some seed money, to encourage him, to have some incubator in some institute where he can quickly start with half a dozen workers. And we lack that. And how to create that? I'm sure the alumni can help. If somebody has come from BITS, settled in US, etc., this diaspora can work back with their alma mater and try to create that ecosystem. And that will be a very, very big help. And they have some of our Indian Americans and in other countries have huge amounts of money. They are venture capitalists, and they are always looking for mentoring people from India, and I know some of them personally. So it is that, and then how to have best practices, because Indian government does listen to them. I think a little more perhaps than sometimes it listens to some homegrown ideas, but the how to improve the ecosystem within India for all these high tech ideas, companies to grow and to
Right.
flourish and to be profitable. In that, again, some feedback, some concepts, or some ideas from our diaspora would be very useful for the policymakers in our government.
Absolutely. Professor, another aspect that I would like to take up with you, you mentioned the role of the new national education policy in your opening remark as well. And, I think the issue of training and skilling has come up at least a couple of times on this discussion. So how important is it for us to look at those aspects as well? Look at how we educate some of our bright minds too. Do we need to take a re-look and a rethink as far as that is concerned?
Yeah, so the point I was trying to make was, you see, today we have two types of systems. We have, institutions like ours where it's a full-time education. Students come in here, stay here, study, and so on. Or we have something like IGNOU, which just gives, correspondence or evening courses and so on. So I think this is at high time we are actually, and they obviously do not have the same value in the market in terms of the graduates they come, because they are not exposed to the same level of faculty resources and things like that. It's high time that institutions like ours actually do a blended education where we actually talk about internship plus online education. So this is something, when we are teaching in an institution like this, you would not believe how many of our students actually have some type of a part-time job still when they are studying. So they're doing the other way, they're sitting in the hostels. And, Mr. Tayal was talking about, actually the startup culture is now very much strong in the campuses. So that's actually happening. At least in the IT and those spaces where the infrastructure requirements are not very high. But the problem essentially is how much we can scale and train a lot, because NEP talks about numbers, and that's extremely important. GER that they talk about 50 GER, that's extremely important in terms of scaling. And so can we actually have a new paradigm where people actually are interning in companies and doing online education, come back to the campus only for short period to do what actually some of the few things which cannot be done online. In programs like computer science, almost everything is possible online. It reduces the cost of education so that whatever our limited resources are, we are able to reach out to a much larger number of students.
Sure. Okay, points taken. So, Prawal, what's holding us back really? And how do we achieve our full potential? And also, do you believe we need some policy level changes too?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One I already said is the mindset, having the right mindset towards R&D, and that takes time, that takes energy, effort, money. This is not a quick win game. So a lot of companies have to focus on R&D for results. Okay, so that's one thing. And in an era where companies are in news every other day for exits and acquisitions and all of that, it sort of becomes harder for entrepreneurs to focus on a long-term game, right? So that's number one. Number two is, while government will play its role and has been playing its role in various ways by schemes and policies and including initiatives such as, now look at something like National Broadband Mission, right? I mean, it's a Herculean task to think about connecting our remote villages via broadband connection, right? And it's already happening, it's on the ground, right? So now things like that is what government will do. But I believe, the R&D efforts and the investment, also like Ambassador Tayal said, the entrepreneurs, right? The private sector has to come forward in, subscribing to the vision that we as a country will focus on R&D and make something long-term, right? So that has to come in from the private sector, while the government will continue to do its job by supporting and providing infrastructure and healthcare and other stuff. So I don't think over-reliance on the government is the right approach. It has to come from the private sector. Having the right mindset is important. And then I think the broader problem that we as a country face around trade imbalance, where we are producing agrarian products and importing high-end equipments, right? Expensive equipments. Now that trade imbalance has to be fixed, and there's no other way to do it, right? Unless we start creating high-value goods, right? We would continue to export our talent, be it medical, be it technology, all of that, to other countries, and would lag behind in creating, value within the country.
Right. Okay. Time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Best way forward, as Mr. Singh said, we have to make something and also increase our investment on R&D. India spends less than 1% on R&D, and that is also mostly by the government. In Korea, I was ambassador there, 3.4% of GDP is on R&D and 70% is by private sector. And it has commercial applications and commercially driven. So we have to change that focus. And as Prime Minister also said, reinvent and re-innovate also, I think he said somewhere. But for that, more expenditure is required on R&D, and government should channelize that funds, but funds should mostly come from private sector. Only then they will have commercial application. We really do not need too much of theoretical research. My colleague from IIT may differ, but I think we should need to go the Korea way and make sure that our R&D rupees go for some commercial returns to the country and to our people.
Professor?
Yeah, I myself don't do any theoretical research. I do very applied research. But yes, I think being in IIT, it's clear that everything is needed. And theoretical research, fortunately, doesn't cost much, especially in areas like computer science. But the problem, the way I see is I've been involved in a lot of research. I also had some successes in taking my lab work to the users. But one of the missing links is we still do not have a mechanism for scaling things. Translational research is funding, which is very hard. The government has been very, expanding the amount of research funding that they are doing. So in the last 10 years, we see a lot of improvement in terms of availability of research funding. But what is missing is what comes out of the lab. How do we get to the user? And there is a translational part. Industry is not willing to also spend much, and government is also doesn't have a mechanism of proper public-private partnership so that we can actually take this know-how, work with the industry to scale it. Things are looking better, but still I think a lot of work is be required if we want to really see what Mr. Singh said to be products coming out of India.
All right. And Prawal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Frank. I think the objective here is to understand that we as a country have to make a change for us to see that change. Banking on the government and the policies and waiting for things to happen is not the way. In fact, I can say that from my personal experience. We at Zoho, a small initiative we started over 10 years ago called it Zoho School of Learning. We started teaching kids right out of school into core technology and communication, all of that. And today, these kids do not have an official degree, so to say, but more than 10% of the company comprises of this group of people, and they're doing phenomenally well in the company. So that sort of, strengthens our vision on acquiring technical know-how. Learning how to do something is the most important skill. And people in the country who are in a position to empower others to do that, right? I'm looking at private sector companies here, who can fund, who can start such initiatives. They should come forward. They should sow the seeds to build that technical know-how in the country, be it technology sector, be it healthcare, be it all of that, right? We as a company, that's the only way. And these things will take time. The focus has to be long-term R&D, not quick profits, not quick acquisitions, not selling it out and get rich quick schemes. So the entrepreneurs, when they come forward, when the private sector looks at it and gets enough support via policies and infrastructure from the government, I think that is when we truly would achieve what we aim to achieve.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that India is far better placed than it was a few years ago as far as technology is concerned. What we need going forward is we need better training. We also have to ensure that, the services side of things is covered. What we need to focus on is to ensure that, the product side is covered too. We need to do a lot more R&D, invest a lot more in research. The government is doing all that it can really as far as this particular, as far as technology is concerned. The private sector also needs to pull up its socks and try and complement what the government is doing. And we need to all come together and bring about a mindset change. And only then can we truly achieve what we want to achieve. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.